Might as well all stand.
It takes me too long to get up again. So.
Okay, well, good morning and welcome to our Thursday early morning workshop with the Nampa City Council. And as we traditionally do, we're going to open in prayer, and I've asked Darrell Bruner if he would open us.
Dear Heavenly Father, we certainly are blessed early in the morning and to be living in the area that we live. We just thank you for that. There's so many needs out there, not only in our community, but around the world. And we just ask that you wrap your loving arms around them. Lord, we especially thank you for the folks in this room, these folks that are sitting before us and our citizens in Nampa. And I see the two blues in the back, Lord, just talking to somebody yesterday, how fortunate and proud we are of our Nampa police. And so thank you for them. But thank you for the business we're about to do today. Help it to have good discernment, good decision making, and we just want to give you praise each and every minute of the day. In thy name, amen.
Amen. United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, let's begin with roll call.
Rodriguez?
Here.
Bruner? Here. Angula? Absent. Reynolds?
Here.
Haverfield?
Here.
And Bauer?
Thank you. Okay, so our Thursday mornings are workshops, and I'm saying this more for just the recording purposes. Typically, we don't take any action, but these are wonderful discussions on topics that we're needing direction on. So we have 4 different items today. The first item is a review of the proposed ordinance amending Title V, Chapter 12, Alcoholic Beverage Control. Shara is going to walk us through the PowerPoint.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah, I just noticed that our screen is,
Switch that so they can see that.
thank you so much. If I'd noticed that earlier, I would have switched it.
I didn't catch it either. I apologize.
Thank you. And yours is on the other side, Shar, so you'll be able to see it. And then turn it this way. Thank you so much. We appreciate you doing that. And then push it back. Yeah, there you go.
You can block Darren, but not Sharp, please.
Can everybody
Thank
see it there?
you. Oh,
Maybe 2 more.
Keep going.
No, that way. No, just back. I'm sorry.
It's hard because there are those bumps on the floor. Yeah, okay, that's good. That way we can still see Rodney and Darren. Rodney? Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're real funny. Can't hear you.
Okay, Shar, thank you for walking
Madam
us through
Mayor.
this.
Madam Mayor and Council, I'm Shar Timms, City Clerk, and I am here to discuss the proposed ordinance that would be amending Title V, Chapter 12. Okay, and it's not letting me. Oh, there we go.
Which is alcohol beverage control.
Yes, it is for the alcohol beverage control. So the purpose of today's discussion is to provide an overview of is
There you go.
So the purpose of today's discussion is to provide an overview of the recommended changes by the Alcohol Review Committee and to confirm the current composition of the Alcohol Review Committee and the review process to determine if it's still appropriate. And then we will also determine next steps. The reasons for the recommended changes is to provide the city the ability to address complaints on businesses when they are using the city's alcohol catering permits, but they do not have a city's alcohol license. It is also to clarify the city's intent for the use of the alcohol catering permits and to implement legal's recommendation on new process for the hearings for recommended suspensions or revocations from the Alcohol Review Committee, and then also to do administrative cleanup. So the first recommended change is regarding alcohol catering permits. They would now be subject to all provisions of the Nampa City Code 512-17, which is the denials of license applications, renewals, and revocations of licenses. They could now be assessed points by the Alcohol Review Committee, and they would be subject to suspension or forfeiture of obtaining an alcohol catering permit from the city. It would also limit the number of permits issued to a business each month per location. It would change it from what is currently unlimited to 2 times per month per location per applicant. It also would not allow permits to be issued for the benefit of a person whose alcohol license has been revoked, canceled, or denied. We do have an additional staff recommendation, and that would be to add "or suspended" to number 3. This would preclude any person or business from applying for an alcohol catering permit using their state alcohol license when they have been suspended by the city of Nampa.
So Shar, could I pause you right there?
Yes.
Before you go to the next one. When are we going to give time for discussion? Because are you going to now, after you're done going through this, go back to each of these and ask for comments and discussion, or do you want to do it during? Because we're going to have that opportunity.
Yes, Madam Mayor, it's whatever the preference is.
Council, do you have a preference? I mean, she can go through, but then we're going to need to go back and have discussion on some of these. It isn't lengthy. I think it's important, for example, these are definitely changes. And so I think we need to have opportunity for council input. Yes,
Mayor,
Councilman Bauer.
I would just assume, if we can, if it's not too much of an interruption for you, Shar, to
Sure.
ask questions. Otherwise, I may forget later.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. So I'm thinking at the end of each page, maybe we need to pause. And then Councilman Bauer, did you have a comment or question? Same?
And,
Okay, and Haverfield, and Councilman Haverfield, did you have a comment?
I'm great, too. That's fine.
Okay,
so,
Mayor
okay, yes.
Madam Mayor,
There's no need to go over this stuff. We've already read it in our packets. So if we can just hit the high points, I think we'd be a lot better off.
Yeah, just unless there's questions, because these are absolute changes that will come forward. I want to make sure that there's no surprises.
Well, they can come up and we can at least read them again. And I forgot to
Yeah.
download mine on my computer, so this is good, so.
Okay.
so
Yeah, we can just, yeah, I think at the end of each page, we'll just do a quick pause. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, if that's okay.
We're not at the end of this page yet, right?
no, I have
One more thing.
one more. So, Madam Mayor and Council, I do want to let you know that for items number 2 and number 3 that are listed, there could potentially cause negative impacts if a business is denied the opportunity to obtain alcohol catering permits due to the limitation of the number of permits, or if a business's alcohol license had been revoked, canceled, denied, or suspended. And Madam Mayor, you are correct. This particular recommended change regarding alcohol catering permits is a significant change because it has not been under the purview of the Alcohol Review Committee. So when there have been complaints regarding operations under the catering permit, we have not been really able to do anything.
Mayor Kling?
Yes.
I agree with the premise of number 1, especially I think it's important that the sale of alcohol is under the same purview or review by this commission. So I think that's very good. Limit the number of permits issued, I'm fine with that. And then the last one to add suspended is, I'm fine with that as well. But this is just conversational. This isn't we're not making any decisions this morning, correct?
Correct. Councilman Brunner.
Clarification. So I'm just putting myself in a business, and hopefully I'm not one that's going to be catering or providing alcohol. That's not my business. But anyway, if I'm a popular caterer and it's the wedding season, June or whatever the case is, and I have every weekend a wedding party that wants to utilize my services in that venue, and say it's all 4 or 5 weekends during that month of June, whatever the case might be, then I can only do 2 out of 4 or 2 out of 5 is by number 2? I need clarification on that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Brunner, correct.
Okay, and I'm not in favor of that. If I'm a business that's doing wonderful things and serving our customers and the people like us and word of mouth or whatever, to limit my business to only 2 times per month or whatever the case is, I guess I don't understand that.
I think that we need to share, I asked some research to be done on this, so you need to finish that response, because, yeah, so let's finish that response.
So, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Brunner, we did do a research to determine if this would impact just exactly what you're stating. We found that that was not the case, except for one business that had been operating in one location every week, usually during a peak season. Most of the other ones, I think there was only one business that only did twice in a month. And when they are doing so regular at the same location, that's usually when we will recommend that they obtain an alcohol license. But for the most part, and I could grab the list if you like, and I could, if you'd like to see it offline, and see the businesses, where they're, what the locations are and how many times they're doing that.
It's been a long time, 47 years since I've been married or had a party, so like that, so. Anyway, so are they, is the venue deciding on who's catering, or is a wedding party, if they are renting out a venue, are they able to decide who's gonna cater the food and alcohol?
It's been over 30 years since I've been married, so I believe it typically is the wedding party. They pick their.
Okay, and that's what I have a concern with. I don't want a venue to just monopolize or just utilize one of our businesses in Nampa. But if I happen to be the third weekend in my marriage, third weekend in June, and the one I want to use for my caterer and so on and alcohol, if that was the case, has already used their two times that month, then I would not be a happy camper. So is there any way around that?
Well, I think the reason for the consideration for this is that if a venue is doing regular events and catering, they should obtain a license. So, but the caterers typically are catering in a lot of different locations, and they can get as many catering permits as they need. But what we're trying to do is not have the actual venue that should have their own alcohol license be able to circumvent getting an alcohol license and only do it through catering.
Okay, so I'm not.
That's the whole purpose of this, is that if it's an individual location that's doing lots of events, they should have their own alcohol license.
So I'm not, I guess I was not reading that into it. So there again, yes, I agree with that, Mayor, what
Yeah.
you just said. So, but if I'm a business and the venue has their own alcohol license or whatever, they can or cannot use me more than 2 times a month to cater at their venue.
So if they already, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Brunner, if the venue has an alcohol license, a catering permit is not required.
So they can be in theirs, okay.
Yeah.
Just blot out everything I just asked Paul, for the last 5 minutes, okay? I'm
But
good.
that's why we needed the discussion, because those are really good questions and appropriate questions for what we're doing. So we just needed
Well,
the.
I mean, Mayor, my main philosophy, I just do not want to limit a quality business,
Right.
limit to what they can do in our city of Nampa. So that's just the main philosophical thing.
I agree. That's why I asked them to do the research to make sure that for our caterers, there wasn't a challenge. Councilman Bauer?
So I just want to make sure it's fair. If it's just a business that's doing it in the summer, is it worth it for them to have to buy that license for the whole year when they're only going to use it for that summer season?
I
Is it
don't-
fair to just let them do it for 6 weeks in a row versus, I'm not sure the cost breakdown, but
Well, I think catering permits are required, and it is also with Southwest District Health. Are there some requirements for catering? No, okay, but catering requires a permit. But they're going to various locations. So that would be a whole different look at code. That would be a different look at code if caterers could come in and get one catering permit for the entire summer, but most of the caterers cater year-round. I don't know of any that just cater in just the summer.
then can I get Ryan how much the price of the license is? It's $20 per day. No, but what for a year? You're going to get an alcohol license.
Oh, an alcohol license?
Yes, it's $962.50 with beer, wine, and liquor.
That's a pretty big difference if you're just talking about a summer company trying to make some.
But they're totally different licenses. A beer, wine, or alcohol license is tied to the location. And I don't know of any locations that are only open in the summer. They're tied to the business at the location. The catering permits are tied to a caterer that's at multiple locations. And so it's a totally different, and they don't have a standard location, a roof over their head like a restaurant. Because a restaurant or an event center has to have an alcohol license. The caterer is mobile, and they do it per event. So, yeah, they are two different licenses, but
Sorry for the
underneath,
confusion.
no, does that answer the question?
Yeah,
though?
so is it the location mostly that is offering the services or the catering that you see it? And I'm sure that's, both exist.
Alcohol license is the location, catering is the business. That's the
So the
difference.
catering can't ever offer the alcohol.
They do, but it's on a per-event basis.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Bauer, typically a catering permit is used when the venue does not have an alcohol license. But the holder of the catering permit, who, the applicant, I should say, does have a license.
Okay. Does that provide clarity?
Yep, just one last question.
Yes, please.
Are we having any arrests, any incidents with these? I mean, from my experience, we're having more issues with the bars, but are we having issues with the venues?
Mayor and
Caterings.
council, no. And I think to clarify a little bit more, we discovered kind of a loophole, again, that businesses that can't get the license are using this and kind of taking advantage.
Are there any other?
Yeah, that's a question, and so my understanding is, at least in Napa, it's not that difficult to get an alcohol license, where in other venues, I mean, they're waiting and waiting for, so is that the case? Are we limiting who can get the alcohol license, or, I mean, a venue?
I don't believe so. I believe it's just a location, Councilman Brunner, on this, where if you're too close to a school or a church, whatever the city ordinance is on being able to obtain a license, it was brought to the committee's attention that we had businesses that were
They're just trying to get around it.
correct
That's
and
what
not
you're
get the
saying.
license, or they can't get the license, so they
And,
use this.
and we don't need to spend time on this if it has no application. There is a state legislature currently considering some things on alcohol licenses. Is anyone aware of that, or does this affect this at all?
Well,
I know it hasn't passed, I don't think, but,
I don't think it affects this.
Okay.
Because it's a little different subject. However, Rick, I'll let you bring a response when you do your legislative update. He could provide that. Okay. Does that answer our questions? Is that pretty good? Okay, now you can go to the next page.
So
Thank you,
our-
Shar.
You're welcome. So our next recommendation is regarding the alcohol beverage control hearings. Our recommendation would be appeals on license violation determinations would still be heard by the council. But the recommendations from the Alcohol Review Committee regarding revocation or suspension would now be heard by a hearing officer. And that hearing officer would submit recommended decision and reasoned statement of the city council for their consideration at the next council. This was actually recommendation from legal to incorporate a hearing officer on that last part.
And with that hearing officer, could you talk about the notifications that would take place? Which is a change in our practice that we kind of had overlooked before. Notifying the person that had been given points to ensure there's a process for them that we're
Yeah.
going to ensure takes place. Is that later on?
Yes.
Thank you, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I forgot.
It could also be discussed here, but yes, I did actually have it on
You can leave it
a
later
later
on.
slide.
Thanks. Okay, are there any questions about that? Okay,
So our administrative cleanup is actually just to move the accumulated point classification section to the point assessment outcome. This was really due to when you were having an appeal hearing and we realized that you were having to flip back and forth to look at the point range and then look at the classification. So we're just going to put them together. So next time when you want to look at it, it's easier to see. So I would like to now really talk about the composition of the Alcohol Review Committee and really confirm that the current committee composition is still appropriate. As you can see, these are the individuals that sit on the Alcohol Review Committee. An option that we could do is to perhaps add 1 or 2 community members. And I also do want to confirm that you are still okay with the chief of police being the chair.
And I actually have a recommendation. I don't feel that the police should chair the committee. Unless you really, really want to, Jamie. My thought on that is, when you chair a committee, it's an administrative function to ensure that the meeting takes place, the order of the meeting. I guess I feel like the police should not have to bear that responsibility because you've got a ton on your plate, making sure the meeting goes, orders the way a chair leads a meeting. So it would be my recommendation that just from a function, that like the clerk can chair a meeting, but the police serves such a critical role in the expert, right? The expert staff that's providing recommendation. And so maybe, I guess my thought is maybe we define the responsibilities so that I just feel like it's a responsibility I hate to have the police have to bear unless they particularly see it as a need. What do you think, Jamie?
Mayor and council, I would agree. We also are submitting, at this point in time, 100% of the reports that are going to the committee. So I'm generating an incident report and then chairing that. So I think it would be
You have a
good
lot of
idea.
responsibility in that meeting. And so my thought is that you shouldn't have to bear the responsibility of chairing the meeting. So anyway, that's my recommendation. Then I guess I have a question. Right now, it's all city staff, and I'm thinking you've got planning and zoning, a building official there. Do you guys feel like how do you feel about being in those meetings? Like Rodney, and then Patrick, of course, is the other person that's usually there. Many times, and in certain other committees, it isn't all city staff, and staff is there to support, but have we had some feedback about it being all city staff making these decisions versus community? Shar, have you had any?
Madam Mayor, no, I haven't received
Okay.
any feedback on that.
Okay. So, Rodney?
I'm happy to reduce the number of meetings I go to. I don't really feel like I have a huge role there, except just trying to be a reasonable voice in the conversation, so.
Yeah, thank you. So any thoughts on composition and makeup?
Mayor Kling,
Yes.
I believe we're city heavy. That's the way I see it. And I don't agree with you. I think the chief of police or his designee should be the chair. But also, I'm okay with that if you change that. But I would like to see 1 or 2 community members. I think that would be better for us. That's a better voice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mayor, question, I realize there's not a lot of these events, but is there, you're gonna make somebody not happy, like we do up here a lot. And I guess in most cases, I'm always in favor of community involvement, but I'm not sure that is, if there's a, chance that a community citizen, because of his or her vote, the party that does not agree with that vote, I guess I just don't want to put them in any type of harm's way. I realize that's probably a over the top assessment. And I personally, I think chief of staff or clerk or whatever should be the chair. But anyway, I think this is one committee that I'm not in favor of community members. If there is any chance of, we've had a couple hearings here where I think there were some people not real happy, and police needed to follow some people out of the room. So go ahead.
I was gonna mention, we voted on one, remember, and we went to the Christmas thing, and that guy came next to us and blew smoke on us? Remember that? So, I mean, he has a. Not the first time, but. Yeah.
So just one thought is that with the new, what do we call it, the hearing officer, the hearing official, they're the ones that are going to be actually hearing it. So the function of the committee is, that's an interesting thing. If we shift to a hearing officer, and Joe, you may have a comment on this. If you shift to the hearing officer, the committee is not sitting in front of a hearing, because there's a hearing officer. Is the committee present for that?
I'll go ahead and take that, if that's okay. So it's kind of just a fork in the road in the process. Step one still is all the same with the review committee as comprised, makes a determination and does its points. And then the fork in the road is if the points are of a significant level to where there's going to be a recommendation to suspend or revoke, instead of step 2 of 2 being what you went through conducting
City
it in front of the
council.
city council, it instead pivots and the hearing officer takes over. So the alcohol review committee members don't participate in that process. They may be a witness, maybe submit exhibits for the hearing officer, but the officer handles the entire procedure. And the hearing event never occurs before the review committee.
So other than possibly police being present to present?
Correct.
And then the person that has the offense would be there to actually share
Correct,
their response to that?
correct.
And then the hearing officer makes a recommendation to council?
Makes a recommendation, and it's really modeled after what the state does with the state licenses. What you had done before was appropriate, but it allowed it to be a little clunky at times, and it's much more efficient to have that process instead of done at a city council meeting up here. It can be done during the day, scheduled by the parties, in a private room, it's not a public setting. And you've got good structure in this amendment that clarifies, the mutual exchange of who are the witnesses. If you have any documents, everyone chairs everything equally. So it's extremely fair and balanced, which was the intent from the mayor and council to make sure this thing operates that way.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman Haverfield?
Thank you, Mayor. And his description just now even reinforced more my question. Is legal involved in these meetings, or is our civil legal seeing the report the same time we see it? So,
Yes. I'm not a member of the committee, I guess. I go to the meetings. I don't vote, but I do review and participate and make sure procedurally the process is all lined out correctly.
and that was most important side. The other is our prosecuting. This seems like our prosecuting attorney should be possibly involved in this, but maybe not. Maybe the reports go to the prosecuting officers.
It's not a criminal.
Before that's, okay, it's prior to that. And my last question would be, I'd be interested to know where you would post a solicitation for alcohol review members, as long as it's not by Tiny's Bar or someplace.
Mayor?
Yes.
A real quick comment on that. I think that having observed the operations, I think having the clerk be the chair makes really good sense. Again, because the clerk's in charge primarily of ensuring this process is done and administered correctly. I've observed the members do have a very engaged discussion if you haven't seen them. There's disagreement and there's different perspectives even among city staff. So what might feel like it's always unanimous, that really isn't. And they do disagree and debate and argue on almost every one of them, which I think helps the ultimate decision-making process. So just an observation.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I would echo Darrell's comments. I don't think it should be community members. Community members. And then the city clerk would be good for a chair. I think it should stay with administration for this particular alcohol review. That's my opinion, but almost exactly what Darrell said, is what I was thinking.
Somebody want to date that time and date?
That's a first.
I had my mic off.
Is there any other thought or opinion to be shared from the council?
Mayor?
Yes.
Again, and back to Rodney's point, I'm not sure why planning and zoning directors or planning and zoning representatives are a part of this process, other than it's just an extension of more city bodies that would help the vote process. So I guess I questioned that when I saw it, and a building official, the same thing in a sense. But, more so on the planning and zoning side. So I don't know if we want to recognize someone else that would be a better fit from a city standpoint than P and Z.
Yeah, I think what's important, and this is where if the clerk is sharing, it does have a little extra responsibility to the clerk, but what the clerk can do is actually reach out to planning and zoning and the building officials regarding the process, the location. Where they come in is as an expert regarding, if there's a question regarding the zoning of that particular location, if there's some other something, right? Do they have the correct permits to be doing what they're doing? I mean, there are other elements that could come up in the process, but that could always be done, and use them as a staff making a recommendation or comment as more of an expert in that area. But as far as those voting, personally, on the committee, I don't know, because the committee would never have a one-on-one meeting. As a citizen, they would not have any face-to-face meetings, and the council, the recommendation, they may assign points, but really the recommendation is going to come from the hearing officer, and the decision is going to be made by city council. We have had at different times, people more on, well, it's an email you received recently from someone saying it's too city staff heavy on a certain group that we have. So I don't know on this one. I do appreciate Councilman Rodriguez's comments, yes.
Mayor Kling, I better clarify. When I said community members, I still agree with that, but I was thinking somewhere along the business line of maybe the Chamber of Commerce official, that it works with our business and is in the business of business. So that's what I was referring to. I don't know if anybody could or would want to be on part of this, but somebody from the business side would be a good avenue. Just an idea.
Okay. Yes,
Madam Mayor, I was just thinking that Chamber of Commerce would be a direct conflict of interest to be making decisions about a business in the community or potential loss of business.
they may not want to be
Yeah,
on
right.
because of that. Yeah, agreed. Well, I tell you what I think I would do, unless there's, is there strong feelings? Do we want to just leave it like it is and just change the chair at this time because we don't have a consensus? Do you want a recommendation to come back with the ordinance change, or what do y'all think?
Mayor?
Just, okay?
I was just going to say, I like the idea of keeping it with an odd number, so that if there is a vote among them, that there's someone as a tiebreaker. But having the building official or the planning and zoning director on call versus at the meetings, I think, to Rodney's point, we all have plenty of meetings to be involved with, to tie his time up. He can still be contacted to be able to give his thoughts. So I think as long as it's an uneven number of those on the commission, or on that committee, I think that would be good.
Okay,
If you decide to par it back.
to a smaller committee. Okay, yes.
Mayor, just quickly, I was thinking about it, that the only situation that it might apply is when someone hasn't obtained a CUP for a bar or something like that. So there's that role, but I can also use my position as staff to support or whatever to communicate that as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we will take, Shar, if you're okay with that. It sounds as though we may or may not make a change. If a great idea comes forth, we'll bring it forth. Okay. Thank you.
So I would like to go through the review process of the Alcohol Review Committee. I won't, based on time, I won't go through each bullet point. But basically, I'd like to confirm that the current committee process is still appropriate. An option would be to invite the licensee to speak for 5 to 10 minutes prior to the committee making a decision. As you can see up there, they currently are not invited. They are not noticed. They are provided a letter after the fact.
Thank you. This is the one, I feel very strongly that whoever is being discussed should be noticed and be provided with all the same information that's being provided to the committee, and they're given opportunity to provide feedback. Now, that doesn't mean they need to be in the meeting. And that would be it. I think I'd like to look to Jamie Burns. Could you comment on, give your thoughts on that?
Mayor and council, so one thing that I've agreed to do with most of the folks that came to our meeting when we had the chief and the state police was, that cooperative effort between the city and the businesses would be to contact them. So if something came across my desk, I would personally contact them, let them know, and then that way, they had a fair shake. They didn't just receive something in the mail. So that's one process that we try to practice before we go to committee on something.
I think that's a courtesy. Do you have a standard form template that you physically deliver to them when you do notify them ahead? And this would be ahead of the committee meeting to let them know that they have, that there's a recommendation, they've been noticed, whatever. And I think there should be a template that's consistent that's given to everybody if we're giving something and communicating to them before the meeting, and that it will be discussed and opportunity for them to provide response.
So, Madam Mayor, what we could do is, right now, that's not happening. They're getting a template letter that states this is what occurred at the meeting. What we could do is we could easily modify that and provide it to them ahead of time, letting them know this is what we're going to consider. And then I would like some direction are you okay with letting them speak 5 to 10 minutes? I know we have spoken to legal about it. It wouldn't be testimony or no evidence, I believe.
It would certainly reconfirm not having citizens on the committee, because it would, based on that discussion we just had, right? That you wouldn't want to put a citizen in that position, but yes, Joe?
Mayor, I guess, it depends. If you open the door, how much procedure do you, at that initial stage, there's been some incident reports which are, because they're laid out quite objectively, there's been some incident reports where no points are assessed at all. So it's not so much a immediate punitive act necessarily. So the process does seem pretty objective, pretty fair. Part of that discussion I mentioned, they do ferret out, and the committee does act with reason. So if you're going to invite them and provide them notice, we would need to add in some sort of sideboard, some structure, a cap on time, not a full-blown hearing, but some structure in the ordinance that allows the chair to limit documents or testimony remarks.
Mayor, go ahead.
Just a quick question, Mayor, where do these meetings take place?
Here?
Okay, so my thoughts were, if you even cut back the number on the committee, you could have that meeting anywhere. But if you're going to invite, it is? Okay, so it has to be open and transparent, those meetings, okay. So I'm just concerned about location security.
Fortunately, we have police here.
Yeah.
Councilman Brunner?
I'm just going to say, Mayor, I'm totally in favor of, even though I know that it can cause some challenges, but if I am a business owner and accused, rightfully or not rightfully, that I would have a chance to verbally express in whatever the limited fashion it is, because some people write their defense better than others, and I think it's important that they have. And there again, I repeat, then yes, would not be in favor of community members being involved. But.
So you know what, though, what just occurred to me, with the hearing officer, that is their opportunity to come before and to discuss what's the recommendation, right? Because the hearing officer, can the hearing officer actually not adhere to what the committee has said? Because the committee's recommending some points to the hearing officer, then the hearing officer sets with the individual or individuals, correct? And then the hearing officer is the one that confirms the recommendation? How is that process?
Mayor, no. So the hearing officer would receive the recommendation from the committee, have the full hearing, and then make the officer's determination, which is in effect a recommendation. The actual decision must be made here at council.
Right.
But it's similar to how the state does it with their liquor license suspensions.
Can the hearing officer, though, recommend something different
Yes.
than the committee recommended? Okay, so maybe it isn't necessary to notify them in advance, maybe because the committee's going to meet, you're going to review the information, you're going to have a certain recommended action. That's going to, and then they're going to be notified, and they're going to have a separate meeting where they're in front of the hearing officer talking about it, and the hearing officer, so they actually do have that notification and that opportunity. Is that correct?
Not necessarily,
Yeah.
Mayor.
No? Okay. Oh.
Yeah, because you don't know some violations. An incident report might be something that, even if true, would generate a couple points.
Oh, and then there's no hearing
It never
officer?
would have been the hearing officer stage,
Oh.
but you still want to invite them to participate
Got
at
it.
step one.
Okay. Thank you.
And Madam Mayor, if they would like to appeal the number of points, then that would be coming to council.
Could the hearing officer do the appeal with a recommendation, or do we have to?
Yeah, so that's, then originally set up, that's kind of the fork in the road. So the review committee meets without the license holder, makes its determination. The license holder would get written notice saying you got assessed 2 points, for example. And that, the appeal process that Chair's talking about is the opportunity, if the license holder wants to have their say and present information, that would be the appeal of the points to the council. So originally set up, that was the chance to have some additional due process. Only if it's a suspension recommendation does it go to the hearing officer route, which is the
Okay.
more formal structure, because it's a bigger consequence.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, and thank you for explaining it to me so that I understand process, and hopefully that helps council. What are the thoughts, council?
Mayor Kling. The only thought that occurred to me is I don't, again, with legal being there as a liaison to the council, should a council member be on that committee as well as a liaison and as a community member? Not volunteering, but I'm volunteering Dale or someone like him.
I see Dale shaking his head that a council member, are you agreeing with that, Dale? That a council member should be added to this, to where would it be one city council member?
Madam Mayor, I agree. I think that would give the community representation, but it's a different level. And it's more administrative. I think that would be important to have that.
I have a question, Mayor.
Yes.
So Joe, if there is a council member there, does that null and void their vote?
That's a great question.
Great
Thank you.
question.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the remark about it being ex officio, right? Do you want this council member to be present? Like, I don't vote and I answer questions, otherwise I keep my mouth shut. So do you want to be ex officio and observe it, or do you want to be a voting member and participate? That might remove you from deciding at the tail end if something were to come back to council, so.
Like the other commissions that we sit on as far as impact fee advisory, I mean, as a liaison, but not as a voting member. It gives eyes on the process and a community member as well, so. That was just my thought.
Is there any challenge with that as far as hearing all the information separate, kind of like a planning and zoning hearing? No. There's not an issue like that, okay?
No, I don't think so, especially if they're not voting, really. I mean, you could watch it, it's a public meeting anyway, so everybody could watch it. But without voting, I don't believe it creates any recusal. It's not a judicial process.
Okay. So, going back to that, so let's see, this particular one was meeting monthly, inviting the licensee to come speak at the committee was really what this change was. And the thought, I don't know that we've come to an actual decision on that and recommendation to SHAR. Thoughts?
Mayor, transparency is important, I think, to the community, that what we're doing is not behind closed doors, but out in the open, and due process is something that I think everyone should be able to have. So giving them 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it might be, just to state their case before this commission is probably a good idea to me.
I think that's also in keeping with Councilman Bruner's comments. Okay, so I think that's the direction that you're receiving. Thank you.
Great. Madam Mayor, I just went to the next slide, and really, you were already speaking about our next steps and really determining what additional recommended code changes. And really, to recap, we are going to be adding the or suspended for catering permits, which we had on slide 4. Regarding the composition of the Alcohol Review Committee, we're going to change the chair to the clerk. We want the ex officio council member.
Go ahead and put it in the ordinance, and then we could also change that if there's a change of thought later. That way she can go ahead and get the ordinance prepared.
And then regarding the review process, by inviting the licensee. Yes? Okay. And so really the next steps would be notice a public hearing in the newspaper. We are looking at April or May of this year. And one of our options that we've been talking about is perhaps sending a notice of the public hearing to recent or even last year catering permit holders, so that way they can come to the public hearing if they like.
I appreciate, thank you. I think the full transparency is so important because it directly impacts them. Since you have their contact info, is that a mailing or is that an email?
We could probably do both.
Okay, because there's a cost to a mailing depending on how many there are, but just so that they're notified. And I would go even to last year's catering permits, you know, a broader group. Thank you. Do you have the information you needed?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And I don't remember if we're within our time frame. You know that. So are we on time or are we behind?
We're a little behind.
A little behind, okay. But the next one's yours too.
Correct.
Yeah. Not that it'll go faster because it's another hard one, but very important. So the next discussion item is the review of the proposed ordinance establishing a mobile food vendor license.
Excuse me, give me one moment, please.
Thank you so much. Jamie, thank you.
Sorry. Oh, I just lost my. Sorry about this. One moment.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
did you yesterday get a chance to see the new Lego store that opened up downtown?
No,
Huge crowd. They were lined up for blocks.
really?
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
It just occurred to me, I forgot to ask you for that this morning, and I'm like, really?
A lawyer finally told a joke. That's amazing.
It's,
Is it?
Lego store.
Well, Jacob looked at it like, what?
I was looking at it like, what, and I should have, I knew. It was like, it just reminded me that I forgot to ask
Go to
you.
the next slide, so.
Actually, Joe has a lot of good jokes, and I learned that yesterday in our council prep meeting.
Yeah.
And so he's just going to keep us going when we have these breaks. Yeah.
I'm glad he's not a comedian. He wouldn't have made it.
Okay.
That was really good.
Sorry for the delay, Madam Mayor.
Oh, that's fine. And I can barely hear you, so we're
Oh.
going to have you bring that mic really close.
I apologize. Okay, so we are now here regarding the mobile food vendors, the review of the proposed ordinance. And so the purpose of today's discussion is to summarize the council's direction that was received and taken, and to ensure that staff captured the council's intent. We are going to review staff's recommendation on the focused areas identified at the last council workshop, which was January 19th, and to determine next steps. I would like to defer to Rodney to discuss how and why we got to this point.
So Mayor and Council, I'm going to bring up a couple of slides that you don't have in your packet. Mayor Kling asked me to review this with you, just the cycle that we've gone through in the past, just so it's very clear. So I will do that now. So this is what we did years and years ago for food vendors. I've had lots of conversations with Norm Holm, the previous planning director who was here for 42 years. And then my experience since 2006 is that this occurred as well. So first of all, we adopt zoning codes for mobile food vendors that try to ensure a clean, safe, healthy community where people prosper. And each of those aspects are important in the code related to food vendors. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. So then what happens often is that mobile food vendors request less regulations. They feel like they're too strict. And so they confront the council or mayor and then, out of a desire to support the small businesses of our city, the mayor and city council typically express their support and they want to help those food vendors who are struggling with the existing code. So then that leads us to decreased enforcement or adoption of code changes to provide some leniency to those small businesses. And again, this is something I've seen over and over again. Then we get complaints from brick and mortar businesses. Their concerns are related to unfair advantage, the aesthetics, not just the brick and mortar, but many concerns are unfair advantage, aesthetics of the food trucks throughout our community, safety concerns, traffic access and parking concerns, and there are others, but as you can see, you get the other side of the coin, essentially. And then mayor and city council wish to support those tax-paying businesses and ensure a safe, clean city that promotes fair economic, treatment. So then we go back to a code, adoption of a code that has regulations to ensure a clean, safe, healthy community where people prosper. And the cycle begins again. And I'm not doing this to be critical. I've just seen this quite a few times. And Norm has mentioned that to me about quite a few times, going through this cycle. And so, we've even done this in just the last few years. We've kind of gone through this cycle. And so the goal for today, hopefully, is to get a code that we jump off of this cycle and we stick with a code that is reasonable for both sides of the coin.
Rodney, thank you. I really appreciate your willingness
Yeah.
to, because it's kind of hard for you as staff. But Rodney and I were talking, and I realized, institutional knowledge, there's tremendous value. And as he was sharing, I realized, I think it's important for us to hear this because it is a cycle that we go through, and it does do that. And so these decisions are difficult decisions. This is a difficult decision. We've had, and Shar will walk us through this, but a lot of meetings as a follow-up and a number of discussions. And some good comments have come out. So it's not an easy decision. It's a big decision because you want to have a safe and clean community with the food trucks, and then we get into this thing, and so we're there today, and I really appreciate those comments, and so Shar, I'll let you take us away, and we'll see where we land.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So a summary of the direction received and action taken is we did review other municipalities' code. We looked at Twin Falls, Meridian, Caldwell, and Cascade. We had a high-level review and discussion with City Council on January 19th, And this is just a little bit of an example of the key focus areas that we did get from that meeting. We then prepared a draft document that was focused on the council's previous comments, and it was vetted by all those departments that are listed on the screen. We ended up having mini sessions with pretty much all those departments, and we spoke, we actually made recommendations on vacant lots, food truck courts, site improvements and accessory items, duration, grace period, and restricted location, and then the licensing process and enforcement. So we're going to go over the different recommendations for each one that I just identified. What we are recommending is that we would not allow them on unimproved lots, which are basically gravel lots. Again, unfair advantage to brick and mortar businesses, and it addresses the council's concern with the gravel vacant lots. Unoccupied buildings with an improved lot or an improved lot with no primary structure would need written permission from the property owner and would be requiring identified adjacent businesses that would allow restrooms to be used. And that would be listed on their permit. I would like to defer to Rodney and Patrick. I don't know if Patrick's not here. So, okay. So, Rodney?
I guess it's me. The only thing I'd add here is the improvements that we are concerned about, and actually I think there's a later slide for some site improvements, so we can talk about that. But some typical requirements we require of brick and mortar businesses are landscaping, sidewalks, on-site drainage, and just hard surface. We're not tracking dirt out into our roads, and it's a clean environment. So again, I think we heard from council that we don't want these unimproved lots being the place where a lot of vehicles are going and coming in and out of. And in addition, we'll talk about access and traffic concerns and that kind of thing on a future slide. That's about it.
Mayor, are we asking questions? Are we per slide, or how are we doing this one?
I think we probably need to, if you're looking, sometimes like our vacant lot, and I do have a question about the restrooms, but please, you go. Nope.
Go ahead, because you may cover that. My
I'll let you.
Well, I guess, I think I read, at least in the recommendations, that were no picnic tables where people are going to be sitting down and just partaking. So it's pretty much a pick up, pay, and bye-bye, right? Situation. So I don't understand why there's any, need for a restroom permit or anything of that sort. Is that?
That is a great question. We went back and forth on this, and I think we kind of melded two thoughts about this. Is if you want to do a more permanent situation with seating and tables, I guess.
Well, if it's a fair, like at a park or, something of that sort, I realize you're going to have, porta potties or whatever the case is. But I'm just saying on a, if it's just in a private lot or a public lot that we allow, that I don't see that even needs to be.
Yeah, I would just state that if we go the direction of truly mobile, as we are recommending, there may not be that.
Yeah, provided a fire hydrant or a tree for a dog if they have it on a leash. Don't worry about the others. The only other thing, Mayor, and this is just generic, I think this gentleman, Kent, on the end, has to deal with it day in and day out. So eventually, I would like to hear from him and his recommendations. I always put people on the spot, so I'm just giving you a little forewarning. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman Haverfield?
Maybe to the same point, but ADA access, which is a civil rights issue, if they're being denied access, the gravel obviously is the impediment that a hard surface would take away, but even compliance with ADA is something that they don't have to factor into their business model where a regular restaurant would, along with the restroom access and everything else. More of an observation than a question.
Well, it does pose a question. I'm sorry I didn't ask this earlier. What is the requirement from an ADA perspective for a mobile food vendor, is there any ADA requirements whatsoever and any responsibility on the city side?
I don't believe so, Mayor. The ADA is really focused on actual physical improvements. I'm not aware of anything that would trigger on a mobile food vendor.
So even though it isn't a requirement, would that be one justification for why being on an improved lot is important? Because it does not allow access, ADA access on unimproved lots. A hard surface, a gravel surface is impossible to like push a wheelchair through. And so would that be any basis for our decision that it needs to be on an improved lot to at least give better access?
Mayor, that was certainly part of our discussion, and yes, a improved lot that is improved per city standards, the lot itself would be ADA compliant, and so they park there, the customer would be able to come up to that. The truck itself may not be ADA compliant, but, you know, the person could come out of the truck and take the order if needed and come out to hand the food out as well. But the lot itself would be compliant.
Okay, thank you. So are you going to look, I guess when we look at this, we're going to, at the end, you're going to go back through these and say, this is the recommendation. Do you have the information you need here, or do we need to discuss this further?
I think we're fine, Madam Mayor.
Are you fine moving forward with what you have recommended? And possibly the restrooms, when you get to the end, we'll come back to that one, but possibly not. Okay.
So our next discussion was on food truck courts. We determined that this was really more of a land use instead of a licensing issue. We do want to make note that special events are handled differently. And we did look at Lloyd Square, which was a proposed option. And I list some of the items that we came up with, and Darren may want to speak on that a little bit more. We did have another possible option of maybe utilizing the railroad museum parking spaces, as we've determined that they are currently underutilized, and it could be a possible attraction to the museum in the downtown area. I can defer to Rodney and to Darren on these.
Yeah. Just, you know, one of our concerns is with Lloyd Square, it has been a venue that's been getting rented out quite often. And so I think there needs to be some policy that when somebody reserves that space, that other vendors can't come in and just set up shop after they've done all the advertising and things like that. So it is a space that's being used more and more. Rodney?
Yeah, and then just to address the more of a land use situation, we view this as if you pick a location that is appropriate for a food truck, we will come back. I think our discussion was we would come back with some new regulations for that. And have it be a specific food court so that we put it in our land use table and they can just decide, maybe it's a CUP or something. They say, hey, we want to be at this location. And then they can, it's separate from a typical situation where you pull up and leave at 2 hours later or whatever, excuse me. So again, we're happy to bring back that idea to you in the future, but we just felt like this couldn't be handled through the licensing, and it'll have to be handled through a land use table.
Mayor Kling?
Yes.
So, so one of you answer, what's the cost, if this goes through, what would be the cost of getting a license for a food truck?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rodriguez, we currently are licensing food trucks, so there would be no additional cost. We would really just be pulling them out of the section they're currently in, which is a peddler and solicitors section, and they would have their actual own license, and it'd just be more clear. Right now, it's a little muddy for them trying to determine what the restrictions and requirements are.
Okay, so what's the cost?
I believe it's $100. Yes, it's $100.
Thank you.
And the term of that license for a peddler, it was a peddler's license. For the food truck license, is that an annual?
Yes.
Okay. Thank Thank you. Good questions, thank you.
I wasn't sure what it was, so
Yeah.
I didn't think it was, I thought there might be another increase. That's why I asked that.
So are there any other questions on this one? And I really appreciate, a lot of discussion has gone around this. What is the land use issue? What is the licensing issue? And I think it's really helpful. So I appreciate the hard work that's gone into this. Thank you.
Mayor Kling.
Yes.
So there's city-owned property like Lloyd Square and the parks. There's private-owned businesses like Lowe's and Home Depot that a person could set up on. But is there a matrix in place that, throughout the city that says what is available, what is not? It'd be a good business model for a young college student coming out of NNU to be the entrepreneur that puts together that matrix if it isn't available and tracks it so that people could rotate. I mean, if you're only allowed to stay for so many days, they can move to the next location. I mean, it could be a rotating thing and quite a business in a sense.
I think I can address that. Mayor and council, yes, we have had that discussion quite a bit around that exact topic. It is, if it's a private property, could they create a food court? Could they create a food truck court versus a public? We've identified a couple, Lloyd Square, as well as the Railroad Museum parking next to the Railroad Museum. But that's kind of why we said it's a land use issue, because it could be on a private property that they have a lot and they want to make improvements and they put landscaping in and pave the parking lot and they make it a food truck court. We don't have a table or a matrix like you've described, but I think we would need to go that direction. And I think we're kind of looking for your direction there. Is that what you want to accomplish? And where is a food truck generally appropriate to go? We've heard some comments from council about it not being appropriate in our downtown because we want to encourage businesses, brick and mortar businesses in downtown. But maybe in that parking situation next to the museum or Lloyd Square at times or whatever, maybe there's some opportunities there that are not on private property that could be used for businesses. So does that mean then that the rest of the community in the BC zone or something that's a permitted or a conditional use permit required for that kind of land use? And then we would make up a matrix of some kind to say, hey, here's some places that the city has identified are appropriate. And we'd have to come back to you with those locations and then maybe a zone that was appropriate. I guess we're still looking for your direction there.
And Mayor, my mic was off. I appreciated Councilman Haverfield that we have prioritization of an NNU entrepreneur over a city.
Yeah.
Mayor Kling?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to throw a curveball at all of you, especially Kent. So what I'm looking at, Mayor, is receiving revenue for authorization to pay for city expenses. So what I'm thinking is this: if the amount is only $100 per permit, I don't know where that goes, back into the clerk's office or back into the city somewhere. I don't know. This is going to be for Doug. If we increased that fee amount, then we could give it a little more leverage for code enforcement and help them with their added job, added cost to protect, to monitor these guys, or I mean these truck vendors. So that's just an idea, Mayor. I don't know what you think of, what all you think about that, but as long as we're spreading out the business here, let's spread out the city business as well. And you guys are so far behind right now. Can you really jump on this thing or what?
Mayor, Councilman, yes, what is...
Can't go ahead and put that mic directly. These don't pick up well, so right in front of you. Yep, thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, I think it's enforceable. The staffing is a challenge. But if we move forward with it, I'll get it figured out.
Councilman Rodriguez, thank you for your comments, and I think what we need to do is take that into consideration. So let's just take it into consideration and take a look at the number of food truck licenses that are generated each year and look at what that revenue model looks like, and if it does supplement. If you did add X to it, would it supplement the personnel to actually go out and do the enforcement? Which is your point, so it's a very good point. Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor, just to emphasize what Kent said, and that's mainly what I wanted to hear, whether it's police or whether it's code enforcement or whatever this council, it's easy for us to make ordinances and conditions or whatever, but please make sure it's realistically enforceable. And so that's what I wanted to hear. Kent also, is it realistic, or are we just in a dream world thinking that we can enforce something? So
You're welcome to respond. Thank you.
Councilman Bruner, it is enforceable. Again, I think the way the proposed code is reasonable. The challenge will be the staffing level. There again, level of service.
okay, and then that's my main thing is consistency. So if you have one food vendor that all of a sudden is made accountable, and then they hear about 2 or 3 others that are doing the same thing but are not being made accountable, that's what I want to make sure that we are fair across the board. So
Yes,
so staffing, I know, is a big part of that. Okay, thanks.
I appreciate Kent's always willing attitude. Thank you. Thank you. What's going to be interesting, though, it's the very thing that Rodney just took us through that circle. If we make a decision on some of these and there's a change, then those complaints are going to come back to council members. And so if we make a decision, we need to own it, right? And the why behind making the decision. So, anyway,
Madam Mayor,
yes.
this is back on the previous page, I think, but we talked about gravel lots and unimproved lots, but we didn't talk about grass or like a park-like setting. Is that going to be addressed in there somewhere?
Okay. It's, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Reynolds, that's the next slide.
You're just thinking ahead.
Thank you.
It's good. Okay.
So the next discussion that we had was regarding site improvements and accessory items. As it was mentioned earlier, we are recommending no picnic tables or awnings, as our overall recommendation is mobile only. This really is a competitive advantage to bricks and mortar businesses if they have the tables and the awnings. We also are recommending no utility connections. This is a significant safety issue that's related to the electrical. Our primary goal is to ensure safety of all residents, and this would decrease the liability. I will defer to Daniel and perhaps even Ron.
So don't have too much to add to that, but if there are any questions regarding the goal, as we discussed as staff, is a truly mobile vendors, not the situation where they've brought in improvements to have seating and be more of a permanent situation. And then obviously the safety concerns that are related with that come more from the building side, the electrical equipment and that in those units is not necessarily meant to be a permanent hooked up to an electrical outlet or panel and that. So I don't know if you've got anything else.
And then we'll come to you.
Additionally with that, if they're located there permanently, as we've seen, they bring in a couple 100-gallon propane tanks, which could be a hazard. We've required like large concrete blocks around those to protect them, but then that just makes them less mobile too, just like setting up large awnings, because now there's these big concrete blocks, and so if they're more mobile, they wouldn't have a need for that. They wouldn't be placing those large tanks on the ground. So,
Thank you. Councilman Haverfield.
So is there a distinction between the awnings being detached or attached to the food truck itself?
I would certainly say, Mayor, Councilman Haverfield, that an awning can attach, that is fully on, like the RV awning that just comes out. I don't think we would have any issue with that. It would be a separate, standalone awning that would be the issue.
Okay. I think if it was stated that way, it would be fine.
Yes, Cliff.
Mayor, Councilman Haverfield, we have one instance I can think of in the community where we have a unique blend of those, where a wooden structure has actually been attached to the motorhome, and it's a piece of it, and it's certainly not structurally sound, but.
I think if it was something that was integral in the actual food truck itself is one thing. An attachment would be considered a detached awning that might be in near proximity or attached to the, so I mean, it would be different. And I think that would be subjective, but just the retractable awning types that you see on campers and motorhomes, I think is fine.
Councilman, I agree completely. And it gets back to the kind of the overarching premise of what we're recommending here is mobile only for these vendors.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I have a question about the significant issues related to electrical. In my opinion, most of these trailers, when they're built, some of them are quite expensive and they are inspected. It's no different than they have a generator sitting there running to run this equipment. I'd rather, if they have a 50 amp service available or 30 amp, be able to see them plug in when they're sitting there rather than, because the point of connection would be inspected as well. But rather than listen to a noisy generator run, I think it would be nice to have them, if that was available, that they could use that.
Thank you for that. I think the key would be that there's no trip hazards and any other hazards, but that's a very good point. Okay, go ahead.
I'll just add in that, yes, we do inspect the generators. We make sure they're sufficient, that they're GFCI protected and guarded from the public. But I agree with you, yes, if there was an established place where there was a good established outdoor 50 amp connection, sure, that could be safer and quieter. But that's not always where they plug in. They run long extension cords into a neighboring business and overload those extension cords. So that's a concern there.
So would it be possible to write something into our code or license regarding that? That if the appropriate, because it's going to be inspected anyway, but that no extension cords to a neighboring business. It has to be an actual approved, service that is appropriate to the use. So would that be something you guys could capture or not?
We can look into that. I'm hesitant here because Patrick is the one that was really the one who was concerned about this the most. And his comments were mostly related to daisy chaining, extension cords out to a food truck and going through puddles of water, and it's open to the public. People are driving over it. People are, stepping over this cord. So I think that if it was, I guess it comes back to Cliff's comment too. Do we really want these to be mobile, or do we want them to connect to utilities? And if it's truly mobile, it can just pick up and go without any kind of disconnection from any kind of utilities. And so that's the question. Do we want them to be truly mobile, or do we want to make little electrical stations for them to connect to? I don't know.
Mayor, just personal, but mobile, pick up and go. And I guess if there's a generator or whatever, I understand fully what's saying, but I mean, it's not going to affect the customer, the noise. It's whoever's running the food truck or whatever has to listen to it time in and time out. But I don't think that's a huge challenge. But I personally, totally mobile. Get out of there ASAP.
Rodney, excuse me, Mayor. What is daisy chaining? I've never heard of that before.
I'm sorry, that's probably just a term I use then.
No, it's a real term.
Okay, yeah, it's connecting one cord to another cord to another cord.
Okay, gotcha.
And there's significant concerns about doing that, safety-wise.
That's a neat statement. I never heard that before. Yeah, daisy chaining.
Okay. Well, we will come, I think, I'm hearing some consensus, truly mobile. Are you, Kate?
I have one more comment,
Please,
Madam
go
Mayor.
ahead.
So, no different than at the Idaho Center with the food trucks that are there. They are plugged in. And probably because we don't want to hear the generators run all the way around the amphitheater. But I think it should be a case-by-case basis, it's going to be inspected anyway. If there's a 50 amp service available and they can do it without a trip hazard, then they should be able to use that versus a generator. That's my opinion.
Mayor, Councilman Reynolds, that language can probably be done, and most likely would be if there is a compliant service with the electrical code, and that does not create a trip hazard by running that. That's likely what we could say there. We'll have to get with Patrick, though, to be sure.
Councilman Reynolds, I will say that that's pretty much our current practice with the fire department. If it's a safe established connection near the food truck, then we'll allow them to use that. It's the ones that are daisy chained and in puddles and all that we don't allow, so.
Thank you.
And Madam Mayor, Councilmember Reynolds, maybe to address what you had just mentioned regarding food trucks at the Ford Idaho Center, that almost sounds more like a special event. And we could put language in there basically stating that they could have additional regulations.
Well, even with this, without a special event, what I think I'm hearing is if it meets the guidelines, and it's the inspection side. So if there is a hookup there, like a generator, you've got a major cord there that's connecting into your electrical. If it's a 50 amp, which is a totally different thing than running an extension cord out of a smaller amperage, right, from an adjoining business that overloads something, right? So I think that let's work on the language and come back with it. Okay, we'll come back with that compromise of if it's right there and it's the correct setup. That's whether, okay, so we had two other items on the agenda. We've got quite a bit to go yet. Amy, I'm thinking that we're not going to get to Republic Services today. And I apologize, but I have a feeling we're not going to get there, and we'll have a very abbreviated legislative update, if that's okay with council, because that is one that can be pushed off. And I apologize, but I think this is going to take us it's going to take us a while, but we will try to move on through. Thank you.
So our next item that we spoke on was duration, grace period, and restricted locations. Again, our overall recommendation is mobile only, and we did get feedback from Kent on all of these items, and this is what he felt was enforceable, was regarding the duration. It must not be attended for more than 15 consecutive minutes. This would allow some of the existing operations to continue, but they would have to be mobile. One of the things that we do want to ask is, do we want to grandfather businesses that are currently operating on unapproved vacant lots?
So I have a question, or improved lots, because we have some that have been here for a very long time they've been on one location for a very long time, and it is improved lot. It would fit every other requirement, improved lot with an adjoining business, yet not mobile. I mean, it looks mobile, but it doesn't ever move. So that is a big question. What do we do with those? Is that what you're asking, or is that one covered later?
Correct, Madam Mayor. Basically, the duration is really the key point. And so this would allow current food trucks who are in one location to stay there as long as they have someone there, and it's not unattended for more than 15 consecutive minutes. So basically, they would have to leave whatever time they want to leave. We decided not to put a time limit. If they want to be there in the evening, that's fine, but it just cannot be unattended for more than 15 consecutive minutes.
So does that mean they can sleep there?
So Mayor, that's clarification, yeah.
I don't think we want to go there.
When they're closed, yeah, I mean, like at 1 o'clock in the morning, does somebody need to be there every 15 minutes?
Yeah, correct. They cannot be there. That truck cannot be
I mean,
there.
that doesn't make sense to me. So.
And Madam Mayor and Councilmember Brunner, we actually grabbed this from Twin Falls, and we thought it was
I mean, that
being
makes
able
them,
to be enforceable.
that makes them get out of there in a day, whenever, whatever their time of business is, 8, 12 hours. If we want that, I understand, but if we're gonna allow them to stay, and then I guess the only other thing, and this is maybe ongoing, if it's in an improved lot, and I'm okay with if it's a private improved lot. As far as public, I don't think we want to give favoritism to a certain food truck or something like that, but they're in a private lot and they have permission from Home Depot or wherever the case might be to be there, then I guess I personally don't have a problem if it's an improved lot and they have a contract or whatever agreement with a private entity. But I guess that would be the exception. But yeah, as far as even then, being there 24/7.
So, Madam Mayor, I would like to defer to Rodney and Cliff. They might be able to provide some more information on this.
Mayor, Councilman Brunner, if we just go back to the very first bullet on the slide, our overall recommendation is that we are licensing mobile food vending. We are not trying to figure out a way to allow the existing problems that we have to continue indefinitely. And if we do, I think we'll have a hard time enforcing this, and we'll be back in Rodney's circle.
So clarification, if I may, Mayor Cliff. So what we're saying is they're there for 1 day, whatever their time of open business is, and then they're gone. That's what the recommendation is. Okay.
That would be the recommendation.
I just want to make sure I was hearing what you wanted us to hear, so.
Yes, and Mayor, Councilman, rather than the consideration of grandfathering existing businesses, I would much rather see us work with some flexibility to help the folks who exist today to transition, over a period of time.
So a 30-day or 60-day notice or something of that sort, just so, okay.
Correct.
All right, thanks.
Are there any other questions for Cliff or Rodney on this one? Comments? Okay, the grandfathering, I mean, I appreciate your comments. This is going to impact, it is going to impact some of our local businesses. We just have to know that when we make this decision, but we're making it knowing it's going to impact some.
Shar, I think the next slide has that grace period, and so maybe
Oh,
we
it
can.
does, it does. Let's
Yeah.
go to the next slide then, because we're not done on this one.
So the grace period, we are recommending 90 days to obtain compliance. And we also would suggest that perhaps the clerk's office send notification letters the same week the new code is adopted, notifying everyone. We could also delay the effective date of the new ordinance. And code compliance could conduct community outreach.
Mayor, if I'm sorry, I keep interrupting, but question, and I guess I'm back to the, where there's a food truck that's been on a private entity, an improved lot, and just example of a Home Depot or whatever, but where that brick and mortar business feels like that food truck is actually increasing their own business by drawing people into the area to get food or whatever. So are we going to hear it all from any brick and mortar businesses? And I don't know how many that would be the case, if that's not even worth referring to. But I guess that's another concern that I have is if we're affecting a brick and mortar business. You know, we were talking about if it's a food business, of course, taken away from their business. But if they actually like having that entity in their parking lot, then how are we handling that? Or have we even discussed that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Brunner, we haven't discussed that. This would come to council as a public hearing. I don't believe I have a list of businesses of the brick and mortar because we don't issue licenses for those types. But it would be noticed in the newspaper and on our website, and they would have that opportunity to come.
Mayor, I'd like to just point out that, so I've drafted a lot of code in my career, and it's challenging to provide these, like, yeah, kind of exceptions for certain situations. And so what I find difficult is how do I say which businesses it's okay to have that situation in, where they can just continue to have a mobile food truck there forever and ever. And so you mentioned the Home Depot. Well, what if directly across the street from the Home Depot is a Red Robin who finds that the Home Depot is competing with their business there without having to pay the additional taxes for the restaurant business there? So it gets really difficult to work a code so that it applies fairly to everyone. And so I would just say that that's the situation where it becomes a land use. Maybe a property owner says, I would like to designate this location on my lot as a food truck court, and I'll make all the improvements necessary for a food truck court, but that would be approved through a conditional use permit or something like that. Then you could have that continue. But if it's an ongoing thing where it's just nonstop, they're there all the time, they don't leave the lot, then we're getting away from that mobile situation.
And I guess my main point, Mayor, is just there's, whatever decide, I'm fine with the mobile and moving as long as it's consistent, but just still we're bringing, and you said they're a public hearing, but notifying the businesses ahead of time that this is the new ordinance. Yeah, there will be a public hearing, but just so they have a voice.
Yeah.
I think we know who some of them are, so I think we're going to need to do a little, we're not going to be able just to say, hey, we don't know, and don't send. I think we know where some of the businesses are that actually have food trucks sitting there. We're going to have to take an extra step and reach out to them.
Yeah, and Mayor, do we know what, do we have any idea whether actually some of these businesses are they renting their space in their parking lot to these food trucks, or that the businesses are actually receiving revenue for their?
Yeah.
Okay, that would be my understanding. Okay, so it could be a loss of revenue and to a certain extent too for that brick and mortar business. Okay.
Mayor Kling?
Yes.
I just have one question. The grace period for 90 days, why so long? Does it take 90 days to comply?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Rodriguez, we were just trying to show grace, yes.
I see. That's really a long time. I just want to know. I think that's way too long, but okay.
And Madam Mayor, Councilman Rodriguez, that really was when we were viewing some of the food trucks that are not mobile at all. We just felt that we need to give them some time.
Okay.
Mayor, if anything, I'd give them 120 days if they're fixed in location, because it's going to take them a while to get this taken care of.
It's a significant change.
Yeah.
For some. It's a significant change.
And just for clarity, this is a significant change for what we are enforcing, but it's not a significant change from what's on the books today.
Rodney, thank you for that clarification, because that's where the change is. It's that we have not been enforcing what is currently on the books, and that's really where this comes back to this body. Do we start enforcing? Do we need to make some tweaks? But really, it's about enforcement. Would that be a correct statement?
That's correct, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, we'll let you keep going.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
Jacob.
I just want to make,
I'm sorry.
I like what I do, have a little bit mixed emotions, but I like where we're going. I'd like to be honestly really identical to Meridian with the food truck situations. But I just want to have, especially for the successful businesses that we have that are doing really well and they have employees and they're popular and lots of people are coming to them, just have a little grace with helping them get a landing spot instead of just cutting off their head and then making someone unemployed where they can't feed their families. So just have a little grace with we know who they are, the successful companies, to just help them get a landing spot.
Okay, and Mayor, and just, that was a good point, but how do you provide, I mean, do you provide 150 landing spots and then there's a rotation basis? I mean, how does that logistically work?
Well, and actually, they have a landing spot currently. It's just that they're not mobile. They're there all the time. So sometimes it could be that that particular vehicle is not even mobile, to where they've got to do repairs to the vehicle, license the vehicle, et cetera, because it could maybe not even be licensed sitting there because it's been non-mobile.
So maybe I'm not understanding. So Mayor, is what I'm hearing then is that they've had a landing spot there month after month, year after year, then they leave when they close at 8 o'clock at night, and then they can come back at 8 o'clock the next morning? Is that what we're proposing?
That's that matrix I was talking about. That NNU student.
Okay, I mean, I'm sorry. Here we go with that circle again a little bit. That does not make a bit of sense to me. That if we allow them to come back the next day and make them just, I mean, making them mobile is one thing that they can possibly do that, but to 7 times a week pick up and come back again, I mean, what? That doesn't make a bit of common sense to me. And I realize I was in the restaurant business for 14 years, but I can't imagine. We did a ton of catering. I can't imagine how that helps us. I mean, we can make them mobile. We can enforce that they can do that, but to actually make them do it then is a whole nother ballgame that I would not personally be in favor of.
So, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Brunner, making them mobile is really identifying that right now competitive advantage that they have on the brick and mortar businesses. So if you allow them to stay in one spot constantly, they are in direct competition with a brick and mortar business that had to follow all of the city regulations.
Yeah, but what's the difference if they're back the next morning when the brick and mortar business is open across the street? The Red Robin was saying, I mean, what's the difference of them staying overnight? As long as we make them mobile. I mean, if you want to make them just for purposes every 30 days, get out of here and come back on the 31st day, I guess that's one thing, but it just doesn't seem to be.
I can speak to that.
Okay, thanks, Rodney. I need some help with that one.
Sure. So a couple of things. First of all, making them mobile kind of pushes them away from setting up canopies and tables and chairs, right? So that's one thing. They have to come and go every day. The other thing is that we've had problems with dumping of used water into just our soils, right? So they're on a gravel lot or whatever, and they dump into the ground, or they dump their wastewater into our system, our storm drain, and that causes significant problems if there's grease, right? So forcing them to be mobile forces them to go to another location in the process of going home every day or whatever time frame they use. They are mobile enough to drop by we even talked about the sewer plant where they could dump that wastewater there. So it facilitates them truly being mobile so that they can take care of their needs of filling up on propane and dumping their wastewater and those kinds of things.
Okay, do we have do we know how often most food trucks, I realize it's different, depends on their business and their type of business, but how often they need to get rid of their waste?
Yeah, again, I think it's truly
I mean, there
dependent.
again, to me, logistically, I can't imagine, but okay, once a week, you guys get up, get rid of your stuff, whatever, somebody else can come in the next week or whatever, there's a rotation basis. I don't know who would control that matrix, but I'm all for them being mobile.
Okay, so
but if we allow them to come back the next day, that's where I'm not seeing the common sense.
Mayor Kling. Oh, sorry, Darrell, my brother, I'm going to disagree with you on this one. The thing about it is I've seen a couple of well, more than a couple of food trucks that look terrible. And they're unsightly, and then they have a tent around it for a little dining room area. No, that's gotta go.
Well, you can enforce that.
Yeah, I know, but the thing is, if we don't make them mobile, why even have this?
I'm all for making them mobile. I just don't,
I know.
you caught what I said.
I did, and so they want to go
And,
back to that?
and being totally off the wall, I can see that food truck thing, oh, okay, where do I park it for that night until I go back the next day across from your house?
Well, I'll tell you what, then it makes them get up, leave, and come back. Oh, well.
Mayor Kling.
Yes, Councilman
I'm not sure how long ago it was, but on the Food Channel, maybe it was during COVID, we saw a program called Food Truck Wars. And it kind of takes away the concern that Councilman Bruner has as far as they do move around a lot. And I think is it the Kilted Cod? Is that what it's called? Really good food. And they just post online where they're going to be the next day. So, I mean, that's just a business that they've got because they've got a following and a very good product. And they just move around a lot so that they can hit a lot of different areas. I think that would be the ultimate goal, to see that type of behavior.
The challenge that we do have, that we've had extensive discussions on this, is that we have some long-term food trucks that have been in the area, and they're approved on the location by the business, and they have a following, but they don't move. And if we're going to apply something, we've got to be consistent. But Kent, do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. Council, Madam Mayor, my concern would be the enforcement ability for a new food truck at a different location every day. In order to track a different truck being at Home Depot every day is I don't think code enforcement could do that.
I don't know that you'd have to, though. I guess if they're truly mobile and Home Depot says, hey, we need a food truck in today, and they're just in and out, there's nothing to enforce. What we're having to enforce are those that are sitting for over a long period of time, that are setting up all the, right, that aren't mobile, I think is the issue. But tell me if I'm missing something. Go ahead.
Madam Mayor, I agree with you. If it's truly mobile and if they are can't be vacant from that mobile truck for more than 15 minutes, and then come back, have to leave in the night, come back to the same location, that is enforceable, trackable.
So Mayors, what I'm hearing from Councilman Bauer is that Meridian already has this in place?
Sort of.
I mean, if it's something that's working well, I mean, here's and it's something that, enforcement or whatever the case is, I would think that we could follow Meridian's pattern.
It's similar to temporary use permit process, but I was actually looking up to see if there's data. I think Nampa has a much more robust food truck.
Presence.
Many more much bigger presence and long-term presence, more so. So we've not had the difficult balancing act that you're all wrestling with right now, with long-term quasi-permanent food trucks adjacent to existing restaurants. So
That's because you don't allow it.
Well,
it
partly,
just hasn't come up.
I think, though, the Meridian downtown core was a smaller downtown core. And then they've grown exponentially, and they have a lot of new retail. And we've got a lot of older areas where those food trucks are established over a very, very long period of time. And so I think we're in a little bit different. Would that be correct, Joe? Okay. Daniel.
Mayor, so Rodney and I, this is where the changes to the zoning code could potentially address this with a food court truck or a food truck court allowance in say the BC land use, where they could come in for a conditional use permit, some of those that we see on the boulevard. It could have those conditions that it needs to meet these aesthetics, it needs to be the improved lot. And at that point, if they were a food truck court and had that CUP, it could allow them to potentially, those rules could allow them to stay there on a permanent basis. something of that nature could address both situations, but allow for more regulation of those that are going to be there permanently. I think that may get us where we want to be on both sides potentially.
Well, even if it is through a temporary license versus a mobile license, could you differentiate between a mobile food truck and could there be request that is an approved request for a longer duration and that location? For example, maybe during the summer months, I'm thinking of one business in Nampa that has a permanent food truck, but maybe you say during the summer months, you're allowed to stay there, but this is the design, this is the safety, all of this has to be met to where there's some things around it, some sideboards around it.
Mayor, I think that's where the food court allowance and a conditional use permit would probably be the best approach to that. I see Rodney shaking his head yes as well. I think that would allow the land use to say, okay, I have the improved lot. These are the aesthetics that we want to propose and what it will look like, the space we'll use. And if they want to change out the food trucks that are there, that's fine, but also could allow them to say, this is the food truck I want there. It's helping my business and could allow for that.
But it's an approved, it goes through a process. Would that go to planning and zoning?
Yes, it would
for-
go, it would likely,
Or
a
would-
planning and zoning conditional use permit so that they could review the aesthetics, make sure it's consistent with that area, the site improvements are there or would be made as part of the conditional use permit.
And then they would still be licensed because their cost for enforcement, we would have to be inspecting that from time to time, right? And so there's a cost to the enforcement. So from a licensing standpoint, if they have that longer use, then again, at that point, I would definitely look at what the cost of that license is because we're going to have to be going out on a whatever basis to ensure that they're complying with the guidelines that we set. Because it still could be that there's no picnic tables, there's no whatever, but they don't have to leave.
Yes,
Okay.
Mayor, regardless of whether it's a TUP, a temporary use permit, or a CUP or something, as part of that process, we would require that they show us that they have obtained a license to be there.
So I think what I'm going to see happening is that we may not be done today, but one thing that would be good when we come back is to explain the difference between a temporary use permit, because I'd like to give Rick a few minutes. We have a couple of other things we need to do, so I think we're going to have to come back and finish this. Could you explain at the next meeting the difference between a temporary use permit and a conditional use permit, how those could be different, who would be issuing and approving those? Is there certain things that staff could approve versus, like a CUP goes to planning and zoning, does a TUP not? So let's cover that and then.
Mayor, just in addition to that, and I would appreciate too, we've discussed this before, and I love it, the idea of Cascade or whatever, where they have the different food courts. But the other thing is then speak with if that's a possibility where the location or locations may be. I realize it need to be public, probably public. I mean, you're not going to give advantage to a private entity. But is there 2, is there 3, or is there 4 entities where, when you come back next time? Okay?
Councilman Reynolds.
Madam Mayor, I like what your comment was, Daniel, about the CUP and the land use. And I'm thinking for like a private property owner, let's say it's Randy's architectural firm and he has a big lot and I want to rent a space from him. If he goes through a CUP and it's an improved lot, I think there should be a fee associated with that improvement, no different than a tax. We can't call it a tax, but it's a fee. But if it was something that was being assessed by the assessor, then it would be an increased fee. But the fee should be equitable to what that improvement is so that it's makes it more competitive to the brick and mortar. Does that make sense?
One last question that was on here, Claire at the back, is a community survey. Do we want to do a community survey at this point? Or do we, to get feedback from the community? Not yet, okay. Okay, okay, thank you. That answers that. Okay, so this has been really, really good discussion, and I think if, one thing that our community, I hope, hopefully knows when we come to a decision, is that a tremendous amount of thought, because as Shar went through, the number of meetings staff has had, we've had a lot of discussion over this. It's not an easy decision, and I appreciate the fact that we all want to make the right decision. So thank you so much for the input, the feedback, and so we'll come back again. You guys are going to take this all in, and we'll go to round 3. How's that? And thank you all for being here. So, okay, so we're going to shift over right now to a quick legislative update, and Rick, thank you.
Yeah, Mayor, Council, good morning. Mayor, did you want to start with the rail piece?
Well, I can, but I'll try to be really fast.
Okay.
So as council is aware, there has been discussion about bringing rail Amtrak back to the Treasure Valley. I think some people are supportive and some people are cautious. Just so you know, I did do a video to support the Amtrak Salt Lake to Boise. What they're looking at right now is a Salt Lake to Boise. But they are asking for a letter sent to the federal government, bringing it in. There's talk about it being serving, besides Amtrak, Boise to Salt Lake City, about having it Boise to Nampa to Caldwell, to where there is some connectivity regionally. The likelihood of it is probably, it's a real long shot. I will say when I did the video, the gals said that the feedback they have had regarding it, several comments from Nampa citizens talking about how they loved it when Amtrak was here. People have wonderful memories of it and would love to see that connectivity back. So the question I have for council is, would you be opposed to me sending a letter? I'm not going to draft it the way it's suggested, but just sending a letter in support of the, just looking at it. I think it's a real long shot. But would you support
Mayor,
me
I'm in
just
favor.
researching
Is
it?
there a City of Nampa cost to input for the research itself?
No, there's no cost to us at all, just to look at
I
it.
personally am fine.
Okay.
I'm 100% behind you.
Okay,
Mayor?
just to look at it.
So they'll
Okay.
be using the current rail system.
The research, yes, they would be using current rail, no new rail. But we don't know which rail, right? Is it the rail that comes by CWI? Is it, because I've heard some comments about the cost of that, which would be very difficult because of the traffic on Milwaukee and Eagle, right? If you've got rail going through there, or if it's the other rail. But at this point, it's just strictly getting the funding to do the research, just to look at it and say, is it feasible, is it not feasible? There's a cost to the state, long-term.
So is it, would it be competition with the VRT system?
No, no. But it may be an alternative to meeting some of the traffic demands we have. Yeah. Okay, so I'll draft a letter and just letting them know. Okay, thank you for that. Rick?
Yeah, very good. As you're all aware, property tax bill has been released last week. It already cleared the House, and it's in the Senate committee today. And it's expected to fly through. Don't have enough time to touch on every single detail. There's lots of moving pieces in the bill. It's a 20-page piece of legislation that establishes new funds, reestablishes new accounts, moves money around short-term, and then moves money around ongoing. And then there's surplus eliminator money. So it's really hard to know long-term definitively how much money for sure is going to fund homeowner taxpayer relief, but they're putting the money in 2 buckets. Those 2 buckets are direct to owner-occupied homes or the homestead exemption properties, as well as to paying down school facilities. And there's a criteria, there's kind of a test of 4 or 5 things. And that's replacement dollars that it's not dollars above and beyond what's already levied by the school district. It's just to offset that payment so that we receive the benefit as the payer. Unless it's a school that doesn't have a levy, then those monies are put into an account in which they can bond off of and pay on future facilities. There's circuit breaker relief as well. That's significant. The income eligibility will be lifted from $31,900 a year to $37,000 for those to seek eligibility on the circuit breaker. Of particular significance to us as a city, the Wayfair funds are the online sales tax revenues that has been funding a tax relief account. Last year, they passed legislation to fund public defense, to sunset Wayfair, to go back into the local, to go into for the first time the local distribution. This legislation undoes that action. Wayfair would not come to the cities. And Wayfair is already spent for the next 3 to 5 years. There's some who debate that. So even if it was to come to us, we would have seen an increase because they would have taken it right back out with the public defense. But long term, the projections are from long-term projections are that there would be revenue that would grow in Wayfair that would no longer go to the cities through a shared distribution, but it would fund in part the school facilities piece. 20% of Wayfair is going to fund the school facilities piece ongoing. Quick update on some of the bills that I've touched on before.
So, Mayor,
Let's pause right there.
Mayor,
Yeah.
real quick before you go. So Zach Brooks concerned about this sales tax revenue as far as the county. I'm hearing that from him. So
Yes.
what you're telling me, it initially will not affect us? And then when these Wayfair dollars, how many, I mean, what are we talking about dollars-wise? Are we, I guess the bottom line is.
It's approaching $200 million.
Opportunity to lose municipality funds or not, in your opinion, from what?
That's correct. The counties, I've looked at some projections with the cities as well as with the counties. I've been in contact with Seth Grigg. He projects a 10-year wash as far as for counties. For cities, for cities, it would be a little bit, actually, cities it would be 10 years, counties would be like 20 years, a wash and offsetting. But from year 10 on, cities would lose, but that's operating under the presumption that the state would not raid those funds over the next 10 years. The legislature has picked apart at Wayfair every year for the last, since it was established. But with the presumption that Wayfair was never to be picked on again or pulled out of, then yeah, we would stand to potentially lose. Keep in mind, like Amazon, other businesses that have a nexus to the state, they transition from Wayfair to the normal sales tax revenue, so we are getting those revenues. But eBay purchases, Etsy, there's a lot of stuff that does not have a nexus to the state. Those revenues do not come into the shared formula, but it would benefit the end taxpayer through at least a 20% portion going to the school facilities fund. Again, there's a lot of moving pieces.
That's 20% of online taxes, right?
Online.
Going to the schools.
20% of Wayfair ongoing would fund the school facilities fund. That's one of the partial transfers of, again, a lot of moving pieces.
Is that distinguished to M&O or not, or do you know?
I didn't list the 5 criteria here, but in the bill you can look, and it's supposed to pay down existing bonds levies, and then it goes down a criteria, and it contemplates that there's some school districts that don't have a levy. There's very few.
And no March levy or bond in the future is also included?
Correct. Yeah, that's still in the existing legislation unless it goes to the amending order, but that's in there, so.
Mayor Kling.
Yes.
Okay, Rick, so according to this bill, and I read 90% of it, and it's confusing as heck.
Yeah.
Okay, bottom line is this. Last year, my house was valued at $490,000.
Mm-hmm.
I just checked the other day, now it's $330,000. How does this bill affect me?
This bill, as far as referring to the assessment, it doesn't deal with assessed value. It doesn't deal with homeowners exemption. The bill, it's hard to know that they're taking the money and then they're going to establish a percentage of what property taxes you pay, and it's going to be offset with a credit line on your property tax bill proportionate to what taxes are paid throughout the state. So there's complex formulas that have to be administered through that. But, and this is just ballparking. There's been different ranges discussed and contemplated, but somewhere around, I don't want to be held to this, but somewhere around $500 on a $400,000 home in Nampa. That's roughly the number, but a lot of people are trying to get at this, but this is not a precise approximation, but it's kind of a a ballpark estimation of how the average homeowner would see a benefit. And some of it is realized at the county level, the city level, and the school levy level, but it doesn't get an itemized credit. You just get one credit at the bottom of the tax bill that just says this is the offsetting credit. But it has all these formulas that it has to run through in order to
And
determine
that's,
what
I
the
think,
credit
that's the
is.
thing that confused me, was that there's so many integral parts of this that all they're doing is moving money around with the taxpayer homeowner still is gonna fit the bill more than the business and construction.
Yeah, business and construction would still benefit from this. If you contemplate, Senator Grove's bill was to direct all the money just to homeowners. The House didn't like that.
Yeah.
The House's version was to direct the money to all taxpayers through just the school offset. And this was a meeting in the middle to split it in half, to take 4.5%, split it. Some of it is targeted just to homeowners. The other half is targeted to all people via the school facilities fund. So it's not going to adjust the levy rate because there is no adjustment to the exemption on properties or classes of properties.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think we're out of time or over time.
Go for it.
And if you wanted me
Go
to
for it.
give a quick,
If it's okay, yes, go
Okay.
ahead and go through.
even year elections, I don't think is moving forward. I'll just leave it there. If you have any questions offline, happy to entertain. Interest and fines, this is of particular relevance. There's a House bill to clarify that interest and fines on delinquent taxes should be remitted to the cities. It's been the practice up and down the state through every county for years and decades. But just recently, there have been some counties that have challenged that and are intending to keep the interest and fines on the delinquent taxes. Long story short, there's a housekeeping bill that we thought, House Bill 150, the mayor went and testified in favor of this housekeeping bill. The committee decided to hold it in committee, which means this clarifying language is not moving forward. And the ball's back in the court of county discretion. There is a pending legal case, not here, but elsewhere in the state. We do have a meeting scheduled, just for your information, with our county commissioners to discuss this, and I've been in contact with them. The county clerk informed me, and I think as well as Doug Racine or someone from the office, that they intend moving forward to retain the interest and the fines on what comes to us, which is close to $200,000 a year, just the interest and the fines on delinquent taxes. After talking to the commissioners, they told me they're not necessarily committed to that position. They're also not committed to not adopting that position. I would sense neutrality and an interest to learn more from us. So to their credit, they're willing to meet with us, reached out to them and requested a meeting. And we have a meeting scheduled, the mayor, Doug Racine, myself. I think there's a couple council members, just to limit it. We'll be meeting with the county commissioners next month to discuss this matter.
And the unfortunate side was, and I'm just going to be candid, it was Kootenai and Bannock counties were the ones that began this. And everyone else, the counties were remitting to the cities. It was just a standard process. But because of their challenge, now there's like 19 counties, including Canyon, that voiced that, not the commissioners, but that they were going to start withholding that. But it is a significant impact, between $175,000 to $225,000 a year that is the impact. So we'll have that conversation, but it's an unfortunate thing. And for Kootenai and Bannock, it will go to the courts.
Yeah.
Yes,
So this is a decision that the county commissioners make.
yes,
Each county?
yes.
Okay, so it's not a statewide mandate.
Well, there are, and Rick could speak to this, there are certain taxing districts.
Highway districts, recreation districts that are explicitly clear in the statute, and I think this part of the statute is older. So that's why our position, the mayor testified, and the efforts were to say, we're simply trying to conform to what the practice has been for cities and what is explicitly clear for all their taxing districts. That's where the argument was really in our favor, but the committee did not want to hear. The counties are saying, that's great, we're doing all this work to collect the interest and fines, and we don't get any of it, and we're administering all the personnel to do this. This is really a cost recovery measure, and we need it.
They're doing it anyway, but we shouldn't, we don't have the time to go into it, but it's quite unfortunate that it.
My question, though, is you've answered, the final decision is by the Board of Commissioners for Canyon County.
At this time, yes.
That would be my understanding. I don't believe the clerk or the treasurer has the unilateral discretion, but that's part of the vagaries that we're trying to address, and the cleanup bill was to try to establish in statute what the practice is, rather than leave it up to, but our
Budget
position
is
is
the role
that,
of the commissioners.
the commissioners, that our position is that the commissioners have that authority, so that's the presumption we're operating off of.
And their legal counsel gives them that discretion. I mean, we'll
I
protect.
We'll have
can't
to-
speak to what legal counsel they receive, but
Yeah.
yeah.
To follow up with that.
The billboard tree permit bill, okay, to move forward, I'm gonna fly through. That was held in committee at the call of the chair, which means it could come back. I've heard it's not gonna come back. They're hoping to be done next week, or shortly thereafter. We testified in opposition. It was clear from the business owner, and I sent you a couple long emails, or at least one long email that provides a lot of details, so I'll just refer to your emails to kind of give clarity of what's going on. But it was clear to the committee this was a NAMPA issue. This was a person who was calling out NAMPA repeatedly, didn't like the cost that he had to incur for the value of the tree and the replacement administration. He did get the trees removed. The billboard, he says that he's enjoying $60,000 a year revenue because of that, but he's really lamenting the fact that he had to do the replacement costs on the tree. So that's held, but it's probably going to come back again next year, but the committee, they didn't want to step into what was very clearly a local issue on this. Strategic Initiatives Grant, this was one that we support. This would provide potentially money tied to State Highway 16. The governor said, hey, the state's doing a lot of projects. It puts pressure on local jurisdictions to tie into these state infrastructure. So this is a $100 million a year ongoing grant that locals can seek funding for. So we're not guaranteed funding, but the money would be appropriated for such purposes, and we can seek this grant funding and hopefully get some funding for tying into State Highway 16.
If I could just say something real quickly related to that, Ada County Highway District was allocated a certain dollar amount, and it was approved to go ahead and give them that dollar amount. What we're hoping is out of this funding that the city of Nampa and the Highway District would actually also receive reimbursements for the costs of Highway 16 that we're having to incur with the city and highway districts. So that request has been made, and we're hoping that that would provide that. But Ada County was provided it, which is amazing to me because, it wasn't equally dispersed to Canyon County and Ada County, yet a good portion of Highway 16 is sitting in Canyon County, Nampa specifically. Go ahead.
That's absolutely correct. So we can't undo that appropriation for Ada County that happened last year and it's carried over into this year. They're not willing to specifically appropriate money to our project, but through the fund, we can seek that funding. So there's still a little bit of a disadvantage, but at least there's revenue set aside for such purposes. So we're optimistic, I know our Public Works team, that we can seek some of this funding. FYI, House Bill 166 deals with accessory dwelling units, and this is moving forward. This bill prohibits HOAs from having restrictive covenants on ADUs, as well as prohibits cities, counties from banning ADUs outright. We don't ban, Rodney already left, he's in the back, enjoying breakfast. We don't ban ADUs, but the bill does retain what they call reasonable regulations related to health, safety, and general welfare for cities to exercise. So there is some concern that the ADU bill would create at least a perceived entitlement for people to build. We still believe we retain the discretion to require permitting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to adhere to standards, local planning, land use standards, but more on that later.
Rick, I have a question for you,
Yes.
Mayor. How does this affect these trailer court off the interstate?
This bill doesn't address that.
It doesn't?
Yeah, that piece would be, that would be a different piece.
Dwelling units.
Yeah, the dwelling units here are specific to something that has a footprint attached to an existing home platted residential unit.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but HOAs, et cetera, I don't know what your respective HOAs. It's a local issue, but it's just keep your eyes open on it. There's been a lot of bills relating to transportation that we do have concern on. Our Public Works team is zeroing in on House Bill 237. this is part of kind of just to be candid, an anti-Ada County Highway District. A lot of legislation there. There's concerns that they might do dedicated bike lanes, et cetera. The state sends a lot of money to highway districts, and the state is wanting to tighten the language to ensure that those monies are used primarily for motorized traffic, not for pedestrian or bike traffic. Some of the bill sponsors realize they don't intend to completely and totally restrict. In an urban design, we do curb, gutter, sidewalk with such funds. And we're told, oh, we're not trying to stop state monies from being used to do sidewalks attached to, we just don't want, taking out a lane of traffic and putting in a bike lane and taking money that motorized ratepayers are paying to go to this. So there's been a lot of bills that are trying to attach some strings. We're somewhat concerned because potential match grants for PED projects. Right now, we have levying authority within the city to probably cover most of that matching, those matching requirements. However, if there's big projects, there would be potential limitations. So it's an item of concern that if the legislation is too overreaching and too restrictive, that it'll tie our hands from doing PED projects with state funds. We would have to show in the books that it was just local levied funds. There's been a lot of impact fee legislation. High-level summary there, school districts not moving. There's been a move to add school districts. Those are stuck in committee. I don't anticipate them moving. There was a move to add recreation districts to the intergov agreements. That failed in committee. There's just not a lot of appetite in the House to add anything to the allowable use of impact fees. And if anything, there's been bills to actually try to limit or eliminate existing uses of impact fees. So there's an impact fee tug of war going on kind of in the State House, and I'm happy to discuss offline some of the specific bills
And we
related
should
to that.
probably wrap within about 2 minutes.
Okay.
So
Procurement, good news on procurement. There is a bill that seems to be moving forward. It's cleared the House that would raise the threshold for requiring competitive bids. This is really an inflationary adjustment because it's been fixed for some time, and we know that the cost of goods and services have gone up. So the thresholds would be lifted. You may have heard about ESG. That's environmental social governance criteria for awarding bids, and there is legislation moving forward that would prohibit the use of ESG criteria in the awarding of bids, as an FYI. Citizen referendum, this is, and to kind of close out what we're zeroing in on, and I don't believe this bill is moving forward. I spent some time at the State House yesterday and got assurances that it's not moving forward, but you never know. I've heard that before. House Bill 273 would allow local residents to use the referendum process to protest the budget after it's already been established and implemented. It's just not workable. So this bill sponsor, well-intended, says, okay, I get it, you have a public hearing and all that, but you adopt a budget and the citizens are outraged, they don't like their property taxes. They can use the referendum and kind of undo or reduce the property tax-based budget after it's already been established and you're spending based on that budget presumption. So just letting you know that this is one that we don't want to see move forward. Area of impact, just the last one to kind of end on, is Senator Lakey's bill is moving forward. I did kind of a high overview of it prior, and I could talk offline on what the implications would be on city of area of impact. And kudos to PD. Just so you know, there's a human trafficking bill. This is version 2 that was in committee yesterday. I was there, and our NAMPA team did well, Lieutenant Kimball, and our PD team. But we are in partnership with the AG's office pushing for some changes to human trafficking law to make it easier to prosecute human trafficking. One of the big highlights from the human trafficking efforts is right now it requires essentially to establish a conspiracy that there's joint intent by the person who's being pimped out and the pimp or the trafficker. And this would simply establish a criteria that anyone who's making money or benefiting is the one who faces criminal. It doesn't have to require the burden of the person being pimped out knowingly participating in an act to establish that prosecutorial bar. So the Attorney General's office is hopeful that with this bill, they can go after pimps. That's essentially the trafficking pimps, the ones who are profiting off human trafficking. So that would be one last piece of legislation to kind of watch as the session closes out. And whether it gets all the way through is to be determined. It's going to clear the House, but it's got to get over the Senate next week. But that would be one piece of NAMPA legislation that we're really prioritizing. And I could talk to you offline about the liquor licensing legislation. Yeah. Yes.
So, Rick, thank you. I think what we might want to do is send this over to council, or you could put it in a Word format if you want, copy and paste, or send your PowerPoint. That way they've got it if they can ask any questions. So, thank you so much. With that, I think we need to end, and council, thank you. I'm sorry we've run over. I would stand for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Rodney.
Thank you, guys.
Rodney?